Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Pi Day of Giving virtual speaker series event. Today's topic is Truth and Reconciliation before 94 calls of action, beyond 94 calls of action. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to take a moment by saying that Ontario Tech University is proud to acknowledge the lands and the people of Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. Our university campus is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, which includes Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, and is covered under the Williams Treaties. These lands remain home to many Indigenous nations and peoples from across Turtle Island, and as a university community, we are dedicated we are thankful to be welcome to we are thankful to be welcome on these lands and friendships. My apologies. Because we don't want to forgo this important element of reconciliation, we are also dedicated to increasing our understanding, our awareness, and gratitude for the lands that we share. And because we're spread across the province today, and I would like to take into consideration that this is all virtual, I would like to ask everyone to take a moment now to reflect on the traditional territory that you find yourself on today, the treaty that it is covered under, and your own personal relationship with the land. Thank you. My name is Jody Cowan, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Ontario Tech. Today's session is the 9th of 10 conversations we're hosting as part of our Pi Day of Giving speaker series, and we're really excited to have our Ontario Tech experts here to share their research and their expertise with you, and to help spread the word about our Pi Day of Giving, which is meant to raise funds for our students. These sessions are also being recorded and have been being posted to our website if you'd like to watch them later, or perhaps share them with somebody else who couldn't make it live with us today. Now, if you have any questions during today's talk, please use the Q&A functions at the bottom of your screen at any point, and we will do our best to get to your questions. Today's session will provide an overview of the principles of reconciliation as referenced in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and the 94 calls to action, which was released in 2015. And we hope after today, you will learn about how you can contribute to reconciliation efforts in your everyday life and how Ontario Tech is responding to truth and reconciliation and the 94 calls to action. With that being said, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker for today, Alyssa McLeod. Alyssa is an Anishinaabe Ojibwe from Nipissing First Nation. She currently works at Ontario Tech University as the Indigenous Community Engagement Coordinator. Alyssa works with the Indigenous Education and Cultural Services team to aid in facilitating connections between the university and the community organizations, enhancing outreach and external supports for students, and strengthening relationships with our Indigenous communities. So welcome, Alyssa, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jody, for that introduction. Ani Bojo, thank you for welcoming me to today's session and inviting me to share a bit about the TRC. Ani Bojo, Alyssa McLeod, Indigenous Cause, Nipissing First Nation Donjaba, Anishinaabe and Dow, Ajijek Dodam, Toronto Donda. Hi, everyone. So I just introduced myself in the language, in Ojibwe language. I said my name is Alyssa McLeod. I am Anishinaabe from Nipissing First Nation, and I am currently residing in Toronto, Ontario, within the Treaty 13 territory, Dish with One Spoon territory. Just acknowledging that territory I am visiting and currently residing on. And I also shared that I am Crane Clan. So it is typically protocol to introduce ourselves, but also just really share who we are, where we come from, acknowledging our roots and our ancestry as well. So that's what I often like to do when I am invited to these spaces, to share a bit about who I am, where I come from, and just really acknowledge and emphasize what I'm sharing with you today is based on my experiences, my teachings I've received, and the knowledge that I've learned along my journey and while I've been here on Turtle Island. So without further ado, I will present my screen, as I do have a slide deck to share with everyone, just to keep me on track as well. There we go. Please let me know if you cannot see the slide deck, because I am presenting now. And I will go ahead, otherwise I am told, unless I am told otherwise. Oh, I forgot to say, yes, I am the Indigenous Community Engagement Coordinator, and I work with the university on the Indigenous Education and Cultural Services team. So today I'm here to speak to you about the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and also speak a little bit to the 94 calls to action and what you can do and how you can kind of implement reconciliation in your everyday life. And I'll share a little bit about what reconciliation is and how we can do that individually, collectively, as an organization, and or as collectively as in encouraging our government even to take action as well. So before I get into what the TRC is and what reconciliation is, I just wanted to speak a little bit to the context of where the TRC came from and how it came to be and what that foundation is for these ongoing conversations for reconciliation. So many folks know that the TRC was released in 2015. However, these conversations took place long before 2015 and many years prior. There's been many documents and many ongoing reports and conversations that have been taking place before the release and the formal launch of the TRC in 2008. So the mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was to inform all Canadians about the truth behind the residential school system. The TRC itself carried out extensive research, including hearing directly from residential school survivors, as well as their families, members from their communities, former staff of residential schools, as well as the churches and former employees of various schools as well. Government officials and other Canadians were also heard in these spaces as well. It was a 7-year process to implement and create spaces to hear all these voices across Canada. It was nationwide, and there was different focus groups and spaces created to hear these voices and perspectives as well. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was created as a result of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. This agreement was widely understood to be as one of the largest settlement packages in the history of the country. And really, it was intended to compensate survivors for the harms that they faced and encountered while attending these schools and attending residential day school systems and industrial schools as well. And really, it was to lay the foundation for reconciliation, one of the mandates of the TRC, but also to work towards creating a more just and equitable future for all Indigenous peoples, but also living in collaboration and good relations with Indigenous peoples and establishing those relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks. So the TRC did conclude its mandate in 2015, and the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation was established. So this was part of the TRC mandate as a permanent resource for all Canadians for further education, for furthering their knowledge about the truth about residential schools and the truth about the history and Canada's role in the residential school system. But it was also created for safekeeping of the TRC records as well. And this is housed out of Manitoba. I believe it's housed within one of the universities, University of Manitoba in Manitoba. Alrighty. Oh, and the other one is the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. So this is another document that really spoke to the truth before TRC was TRC. And a lot of folks often forget about this report because this report actually did also speak to ways about creating great relations between the Canadian government as well as Indigenous peoples and how we can move forward as a society to support and work with Indigenous peoples. So these conversations are definitely not new, and that was the purpose of me highlighting this slide, was to just demonstrate that these conversations, even though you might be new to them or you're just joining them recently or you have been involved, they have been ongoing for many years. And I think if anything, with the TRC, with the uncovering of the children throughout last year, I think these conversations are being re-sparked and reignited, which is great. So I do encourage folks, whatever point of your learning journey you are on, to continue that learning journey and inspire others to also take that learning journey as well. Alrighty, so in 2015, the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was released. And this recirculated the truth and realities behind Canada's role in colonial practices and policies, such as the Indian residential school system. One of these reports that was released was the 94 calls to action. So this one is the more common one. There were many other reports as well. As I mentioned, a lot of survivors were spoken to and their perspectives were shared. So there's an entire document that's actually dedicated to survivor stories as well. So I do encourage folks to check that out and and take some time to listen to the survivor stories and hear those realities and focus on what that truth was and what that true involvement entailed from the Canadian government, because that's the purpose of the 94 calls to action, is to really address that harm that was created and imposed on Indigenous peoples. So this document 94 calls to action called on various levels of government and sectors as well, including business, media, child welfare, education, to address those harms and wrongdoings and implement meaningful change and action in efforts to reconcile these harms that were imposed on Indigenous peoples and communities. So it was divided into two sections. And like I mentioned, it was the sector piece, legacy was part of it, reconciliation was also part of it. And it is broken down into 94 specific calls to action. So those are just overarching themes within the 94 calls to action report. There are many others very specific within each education, within child welfare, within the health system and the justice system as well. And of course, there's different perspectives as well, as including recognition and call for action for apologies from the churches as well, and recognizing what their involvement was in the Indian residential school system as well. So this is just a brief overview of what that document entails, but I do encourage folks to check it out because it is very in-depth and detailed as well. And it is guiding a lot of work that organizations are undertaking right now within regards to reconciliation and or responding to the TRC. There's a lot of individual organizations, there's a lot of community organizations, school boards even, and they're implementing different reconciliation action plans. It's going to look different across the board. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all plan. It's going to be encompassing those local communities as well and local perspectives on what that looks like in action. So when the TRC was released in 2015, there was also 10 principles of truth and reconciliation that was also released. And this was, the intention with that was that it would assist Canadians moving forward with reconciliation. So I'm going to go over a few, not all 10. They are outlined in the TRC itself, so I do encourage folks to look at that if you are curious to learn what the others are. These are some of the key ones, some of the ones that are kind of more prevalent in reconciliation efforts that are ongoing, but again, of course, they're all important, so it's important that we do know them all. So for example, reconciliation is a process of healing relationships and requiring public truth sharing. So I think that's important because before we get to reconciliation, we have to acknowledge the truth and we have to get to the truth before we can get to reconciliation. Many folks don't even know the entire truth and they just want to know how they can jump to reconciliation, but it is a process and that needs to be emphasized as a process with no timeline set, no destination per se either, but a process. And it's a collaborative effort as well, which leads to the next piece, that it's a shared responsibility. So this also goes hand in hand with many other concepts and themes that often come up in conversations. So this would align with we are all treaty people. You might have heard that in community spaces as well. We are all treaty people is intended to emphasize that all people have treaty rights, treaty obligations, and responsibilities. It is not specific to Indigenous folks. It is applicable to all Canadians, everyone across Canada, as everyone benefits from the treaties, not just Indigenous peoples. And part of those obligations within treaty obligations is to learn and understand treaties from all perspectives. So again, it's going back to that truth, not learning a one-sided perspective of the treaties, but really doing that research and listening and seeking out the truth and facts from historians, from elders, knowledge keepers. Indigenous peoples were an oral society. So more often than not, these teachings and these understandings are not documented or not recorded, written, or they're shared orally. So I do encourage folks to seek out those different learning opportunities to learn the different truths that are out there and being circulated by community members. And also it's important to ensure that the government also upholds their obligations. And as citizens, it's our responsibility to pressure them and to also challenge and ensure that they are upholding their obligations as well in a leadership position as well. And really just acknowledging that it's also about protecting the environment and it's about the land and connections and relations to the land as well. And noting, again, it's about inclusivity. It's not Indigenous folks advocating for the land for their right and their access. It's about the benefit of having a healthy next 7 generations, for all our generations to come, for all our grandchildren's, for everyone, not just for Indigenous communities, but we're advocating on behalf of having a healthy Mother Earth and having a healthy planet to be able to prosper and live wealthy and live in collaboration with each other and live in harmony with each other. And also learn, respect, and care, and become an ally. There's different ways to become an ally. And I think part of that is beginning conversations and building relationships with Indigenous communities, Indigenous individuals, and/or community organizations. But the intent and spirit of treaties in general and that piece of shared responsibility is to make sure that everyone lives in this area and will take care of each other. And I think that even goes back to the original intent of treaties, looking at the Wampum Belt or the Peace and Friendship treaties. It was this idea of each of us living in our own, or going down the river in our own kind of vessels, in our own canoes, living coexisting and living in harmony, but sharing the resources with each other and not interfering with each other. And that piece around coexisting and sharing resources also reflects in another treaty, the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. I think I alluded to that earlier. That was a treaty between the Anishinaabe people and the Haudenosaunee people, where it was an agreement to share the resources on the land, share the resources in the territory, and live coexisting with each other and live in relation with each other without interfering with each other's lifestyles, and just really that aspect of sharing the resources for the benefit of all. Reconciliation also requires constructive action. So this is a big one as well. There's another common phrase or common buzzword, reconciliation. And that just really implies and emphasizes reconciliation requires more than just statements, more than plans. It requires meaningful action at the individual level, at the community level, at the government level, at the corporate level. It's a responsibility of everyone. And that action looks different for all. There's no specified timeline. And really, it's about how you're incorporating that action into your everyday life as well as part of that conversation as well. I'd like to share something. I tuned into a session earlier this week with Cynthia Wesley Esquimalt, and she is one of the TRC honorary witnesses. She has tremendous knowledge on the whole process because she was involved in the entire process. But she shared that we individually need to take responsibility for the knowledge that you need to acquire at the micro level. And that is a starting point for everyone on their reconciliation journey, is to seek out what you can do at that micro level, at the individual level, to contribute to reconciliation efforts in your everyday life. Alrighty, and these are a couple other examples of principles within the TRC. United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is the framework for reconciliation, which was also just recently adopted in Canada. So exploring what that might look like moving forward and really recognizing the pieces within that document in itself and how that guides the framework for reconciliation. Supporting Aboriginal people's cultural revitalization and integrating Indigenous knowledge systems, oral histories, laws and protocols, and connections to the land as reconciliation processes, and noting that this needs to be happening. And then in addition to integrating Indigenous knowledge systems, including Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders and the knowledge they hold tremendous amount of teachings and knowledge on traditional cultural traditions, protocols, ceremonies, and this is all knowledge that's so important that we need to be carrying forward to the next generation as well. Reconciliation requires sustained public education and dialogue about the history and legacy of Indian residential schools and treaties and Aboriginal rights. So again, it's that ongoing piece of having these conversations, creating spaces like this to share information, and even having conversations at your dinner table and challenging kind of misconceptions that might be going around about stereotypes or inaccurate information about the TRC. And one important piece, I think, with this one is that Murray St. Clair, one of the TRC commissioners himself, said education is what got us into this mess and education is what will get us out. So really just emphasizing the importance for education And again, to quote Cynthia Wesley Esquimalt, she said that truth is the first part of restoring nations' spiritual well-being. So just acknowledging that truth needs to come first before anything else. So as we're speaking to the TRC, I did want to briefly highlight Canada's kind of commitment to reconciliation, and they're responding to the 94 calls to action and what that looks like today, since it was released in 2015. So on the slide, you can see that there are a few that are completed. So 20 have not been started or addressed at all. 32 are in progress with projects proposed. 29 are in progress with projects underway, and 13 are complete. However, I use that term complete loosely, as that might imply gestures or statements about commitment, yet lacking certain aspects or systemic change, or there might be kind of other limitations that have come up since it's been completed. So it's also hard to determine what progress looks like within implementing the calls to action, because as I mentioned earlier, there isn't really a destination with reconciliation. Progress looks different for everyone at each level of government, for all parties involved, really. So it's really hard to measure that progress piece. However, I really want to emphasize this because it's important to acknowledge there has been some movement. There has been a lot of things that have been addressed within regards to the 94 calls to action. It's not old news. It's still relevant. It's still present in a lot of conversations and guiding a lot of work, I think, today within different organizations and at different levels of government. I think I heard yesterday, the City of Toronto also just released their Truth and Reconciliation Action Plan and what that's going to look like. So it's really exciting just to see and hear that this conversation is continuing onwards and what that's looking like. So these are just some examples. I think I mentioned 13, right? So I only put a few. And again, it's just take these with a grain of salt because there are some kind of ifs, ands, or buts involved with some of these. But of course, one example, such as establishing a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We saw that implemented last year. That was the first day for it. It's not a statutory holiday for all per se, but there's some progress there. And it is a national day of recognizing those truths. So this is just a brief overview of some of those examples, acknowledging Aboriginal rights, including Aboriginal language rights, appointing an Aboriginal language commissioner, creating university and college degree diploma programs in Aboriginal languages. And of course, that's not all universities, colleges, or pathway programs, select ones, appointing a public inquiry into the causes of and remedies for the disproportionate victimization of Aboriginal women and children and girls. That's also another one. There's even a document on an national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, 2+ spirit, which I believe I referenced later as well. So those might be popped into the chat as well. So there's a lot of reports that are kind of explaining there's calls to action and things you can do. And sometimes it's overwhelming because it seems they're kind of systemic based, but there are opportunities for you to use your voice at the individual level as well. So now we can get into what is reconciliation and discussing what can you do, what perspectives on reconciliation can I speak about in my everyday life or within your organization. So what I will say is reconciliation looks different for everyone. There's no one definition per se. It's going to look different for each person, and your definition might change over time. In fact, it probably should change over time. And again, as I mentioned, it's a process, right? So the first quote I'm going to share is by 2 Indigenous community members. They are from the BC area, they're First Nation. So they share that reconciliation means respecting Indigenous individuals' beliefs, cultures, traditions, worldviews, challenges, and goals. And it means recognizing and supporting the deep connections Indigenous peoples have to the natural world and their reclamation of identity, language, culture, and nationhood. Reconciliation is an act of conscious decolonizing of your thinking, actions, and words, and it offers healing for all Canadians and an opportunity to move forward with humility. So this comes from their book on Indigenous relations, insights, tips, and suggestions to making reconciliation a reality. It's a really great book. There are a lot of tips in it. Oh, my background is blurred, sorry. But there's actually a lot of practical takeaways from the book. So I do encourage folks to check it out. They also do have a website. They have a training organization that Bob Joseph founded. I think Cynthia supports a lot of the work Bob Joseph does as well. And they have a lot of great resources to really encourage folks to learn more about what reconciliation is, but also how they can make that next step into progressing reconciliation as well. So this one comes from an ally. This is from Lisa Helps, the mayor of Victoria, British Columbia. Reconciliation means action, not words, and trust building. Reconciliation is a learning and healing journey. And on this journey, we, those who are visitors, here take our guidance from you, those whose lands we are visitors upon. So this actually came from a book, Speaking Our Truth, A Journey of Reconciliation by Monique Gray Smith. Again, another great resource. I know that one is great for all ages, kids, adult, there's a lot of great information in that one. And I really wanted to look into what Lisa has been doing within her commitment to reconciliation as mayor of Victoria. So I actually found out since she's become mayor in 2014, she's worked with the city and the councillors to approach the local First Nation communities to ask if they can move forward in supporting with a reconciliation task force. So they reached out to the community and they asked for their input and consultation on how to move forward in a good way. And they took into consideration, and they listened and took into consideration the feedback they received from the community, where the community said that a task force is a colonial approach and they'd rather not a task force, but creating a family kind of government structure or unit of organization to move forward, because everything within the Indigenous perspective is all about communal goals, communal wellness, and family is very crucial and an important value as well. So that's when they created the city family, and that's where they set out on their journey of reconciliation. Now, when they set out on this journey of reconciliation in 2017, I believe they initially said it's the year of reconciliation and they're committing to a year of reconciliation. And they did later acknowledge they were naive in that statement, because they later realized reconciliation is not kind of a 1-year commitment, it's an ongoing commitment, right? And it's a long-term commitment. So I think that's really important to emphasize, and that it is a long-term commitment, and it is going to be that ongoing conversation. And I think it's so important that they were also including the local First Nation communities. That's always one important step that you can take if you don't know, is to reach out to your local First Nation community and see what opportunities are available for you to support, learn more, get involved. A couple of other things Lisa has done during her term as mayor is support with the removal of the Sir John A. Macdonald statue from City Hall. And in 2021, she actually spearheaded the cancellation of Canada Day celebrations, concluding that that day would be damaging and not appropriate, especially given the uncoveries of the 215 plus children that were uncovered throughout last year, which we are up to now more than over 1,000 children that have been uncovered, since June of last year. And that number is likely to grow even more. And that number is not even inclusive of what the number is in the TRC report, which I believe is over 4,000. So this is still real. This is still living reality today. I think it's very important to acknowledge that. And I just really wanted to emphasize what Lisa was doing and how she was responding, especially with her statement about it being more than words, it's actions. So those are just some examples of the stuff that she has done in committing to her commitment to reconciliation. So this one is from the TRC itself, their definition of reconciliation. So according to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, reconciliation is an ongoing process of establishing and maintaining respectful relationships. A critical part of this process involves repairing damaged trust by making apologies, providing individual and collective reparations, and following through with concrete actions that demonstrate real societal change. Establishing respectful relationships also requires the revitalization of Indigenous law and legal traditions. So there's a lot within that statement, but I think it's important just to acknowledge it's the core of building those relationships. And the TRC honorary witness Cynthia Wesley Esquimalt would share that without that personal connection building and maintaining relations, we cannot touch the core of reconciliation. So that is really the importance of where we're moving forward with reconciliation. So what can you do? There are many things you can do on an individual level, whether that's in your individual everyday life, your professional life, your community, it varies. But it's really just about that personal commitment and looking inwards and looking at what do you know, what do you not know, and committing to that learning journey. Bob Joseph actually says reconciliation is a learning journey and a journey of discovery. And there's no harm in saying you don't know anything. Your learning journey has to start somewhere. So some examples, something I'm always passionate and advocating for is amplifying and uplifting Indigenous voices. Attend community events that are hosted by First Nation, Métis, Inuit community members, community organizations. More often than not, they will be open to the public unless they're otherwise specified. So one generic example is powwows. Many First Nation communities host powwows annually. There's what's known as a powwow trail. So each First Nation community has an annual date each year on the weekend to host a powwow that's open to the general public, open to anyone to attend. Community organizations also tend to organize events, one being powwows, one being speaker series. I know someone mentioned recently, more often than not in city centers, there'll be friendship centers. Those are welcoming spaces for all individuals to pop into and learn as well. And again, just to that piece, if it's not open to the general public, there's no harm in asking, just to clarify, but otherwise it usually will specify if it's close to certain community members. One example I can think of is full moon ceremony. That's specifically for women in attending that ceremony. So typically they will exemplify or share if it's only for certain individuals or if it's closed for a respectful manner or if it's ceremonial and sacred. Other opportunities, learn about the communities whose land you live on. That can also go hand in hand with land acknowledgements and what the purpose of land acknowledgements are. It's more than just stating whose land you're residing on and acknowledging whose traditional territory it is, but what is your personal relationship to the land? What actions are you taking to have those relationships with those local First Nation communities or Indigenous peoples? It's about that commitment that you're making and going beyond stating a statement and doing something more than just stating it. So this is some examples of things you can do. Again, it's not an exhaustive list. It's not all the things you can do, the only things you can do. And this was circulated on social media shortly after the uncovering of the children last year, and it was by the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. But really, I encourage you to follow Indigenous organizations, subscribe to their newsletters. I've been following a lot of community organization newsletters, and there's so many opportunities that I learn about through those subscriptions. That's how I often share a lot of opportunities available to youth in the community. It's just being in the know and keeping in good relations with those communities and keeping up with all the great work that they're doing to offer community members as well as educational sessions for non-Indigenous folks as well. There are a lot of opportunities for you to advance reconciliation in your everyday life. So some other examples that I will speak to is 4 Seasons of Reconciliation. This is one example that the university is actually pursuing as well, Ontario Tech. The professional development modules and their online courses that provide anti-racism education, which is in line with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You can take it as an individual, you can take it as a group, you can take it as an organization. There is a fee involved with this one, however. Same with the next one, the Indigenous Corporate Training Incorporation. That's the organization founded by Bob Joseph and Cynthia. I can't remember if it's both or just Bob, but that's the Bob Joseph organization. There's a lot of great resources on that website. Again, there's a fee for those trainings, but a lot of free resources available for your use as well. Stay in the know with Indigenous-led organizations. This is just a few small examples of some kind of nationwide organizations that are doing reconciliation efforts, working in collaboration with First Nation communities to advance relationships between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples. So Legacy of Hope Foundation is one. They have a lot of resources on. Before September 30th was National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It was Orange Shirt Day. They have a lot of resources for that. Gord Downey and Chani Wenjack Fund, they do a lot of reconciliation efforts as well. Circles for Reconciliation, First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, that's another great Indigenous-led organization. They don't rely on government funding whatsoever. They rely on donations, community support, but they do a lot of great work within child welfare and advocating for First Nation children rights. And another somewhat local one is the Woodland Cultural Center. So if folks are really eager to support something after hearing today's talk, Woodland Cultural Center has a Save the Evidence campaign where they're looking to raise funds to restore the former Mohawk Institute residential school and kind of redevelop it to make it into an educational center. So I think I received an email from that yesterday saying that they've reached their goal, but by all means, that doesn't mean they wouldn't accept support or ongoing support to continue on with their mission and their goal of opening the center. They also offer a lot of other educational opportunities. They offer tours of their sites as well, and they have other fundraising campaigns that happen throughout the year as well. So I'm just going to speak briefly to some of the commitments and the ways Ontario Tech University is responding to truth and reconciliation. So in 2017, the President's Indigenous Reconciliation Task Force was released. Their mandate was to work with the Indigenous Education Advisory Circle to identify strategic priorities, determine measurable objectives, and create a 3-year plan designed to increase our capacity to recruit, support, retain, and graduate Indigenous learners. So this was the core of the launching of the President's Reconciliation Task Force in 2017. Now, of course, there's been many conversations. There are many working groups behind the scenes that are doing so much more than just focusing on a 3-year plan to recruit, support, and retain and graduate Indigenous learners. However, of course, as an institute that is offering education, that is one of the core goals. And a lot of the stuff that is being done behind the scenes is to support that core goal. The next slide will kind of go over what some of those goals are and some examples of what they are as well. So just to speak briefly to Ontario Tech's journey. So in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action was released. 2016, a report by 2 faculty members at Ontario Tech University, Rachel Aris and Thomas McMorrow, released the UOIT's role in reconciliation, options and opportunities in indigenizing the curricula. That was done in consultation with the Indigenous Education Cultural Services team, as well as Shirley Williams, who is an elder that supports many of the Indigenous reconciliation efforts at the university. In 2017 was the launch of the President's Indigenous Reconciliation Task Force. In 2020, the President's Indigenous Reconciliation Task Force status report. So that one really exemplified kind of concrete examples of what the university has done between 2018 and 2020 to achieve their goals and priority areas within that initial reason why they launched the task force. And then in 2020, the President's Indigenous Reconciliation Task Force has a document outlining what their strategic plan is and even more detailed about what that entails. So in 2021, came the Indigenous Community Engagement Coordinator position. This was a strong kind of advocacy piece from the Indigenous Education Advisory Circle, emphasizing the need for a community engagement position to really go beyond recruitment, go beyond a mainstream recruitment approach and focus on connecting with communities sooner than grade 12 and building those relationships with First Nation communities and Métis and Inuit communities and organizations. Because if we want students to attend the university, we need to be doing more than just connecting with them at the grade 12 level. We need to be connecting with them to support them on their education journey throughout high school, throughout elementary school, and what that looks like, acknowledging there's different transition periods from elementary to high school. That alone can be intimidating. So supporting them along each of those milestones and building those relationships along the way. What's next for the Reconciliation Task Force? The task force will be transitioning to a standing committee, just acknowledging that ongoing commitment and noting that the university is committed to reconciliation efforts and ongoing reconciliation efforts within the university, but also in building relationships with community members. As well as the Indigenous Studies minor will be launched very soon, hopefully by 2023, and this will be available for all students attending Ontario Tech University in any program. Alrighty, and lastly, so I did briefly allude to this. This is just an overview of some of those kind of goals and priorities that the President's Indigenous Reconciliation Task Force has outlined in their strategic plan. So each of these points have working groups involved with them. So each of these working groups have different members from the university, and that's what the task force has as well. Actually, I meant to mention that. So the task force is made up of the university members, members from the Indigenous community, as well as the Indigenous Education and Cultural Services team. And within the task force, we have these working groups, and all these working groups work to kind of progress these goals that were outlined. So increasing Indigenous visual and artistic representation on campus is one example. So one way of that being implemented was buying quilts by Alice Williams and implementing them in the Indigenous student space, which is Muckla's Den, which is actually in Ontario Tech's newest building, Shawunjigewinning Hall, which underwent a naming ceremony to receive its name. And Shawunjigewinning Hall stands for Friendship, Kindness, and Peace. So it's really just about kind of enhancing that Indigenous presence across the campus university, and not just in select spaces such as the Indigenous student spaces, but across the entire campus university. So another one is training for staff and faculty. Again, another group that's kind of working towards creating these opportunities for staff and faculty to have those educational opportunities. I alluded to the 4 Seasons of Reconciliation program. That is one example. Another example is the land acknowledgement training that was done in person, or sorry, that was done a couple of times last year. And I think they're looking to actually create an ongoing module for that as well and keep that momentum going with it. Increasing Indigenous staff and faculty presence on campus. So that's working really closely in collaboration with human resources and looking at how to go about that in a good way. So one way they've been kind of navigating that is connecting with colleagues at other universities to explore best practices, exploring different job board postings. So looking at job boards that Indigenous community members might utilize. One example is Indigenous Professional Associations of Canada, or Anishinaabe News within the First Nation communities. That's another common news platform that community members use within First Nation communities. So really just enhancing and supporting how to best connect and explore ways that Indigenous community members can also be represented as staff on campus and at Ontario Tech University. Inclusion of Indigenous topics, perspectives, and ways of knowing across curricula. This one is a big one. There's a lot of work happening on that piece. There, for example, there's an Indigenous Dissertation Completion Fellowship, which is a partnership between Trent University. A student that's completing their PhD comes to our university and they teach the intro to Indigenous studies as well. Another example would be a community of practice. So this is a group of people who share a passion for something that they want to do or learn how to do better, and they interact regularly. So they come together for purposes of resource sharing or problem solving, or kind of implementing initiatives to better support each other, or so that better support the university community as well. Curriculum Consultation Committee is another example, but that's kind of part of the Indigenous Education Advisory Circle as well. But again, still great work to working to support faculty that are looking to become or to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into their curricula as well. And the last one, Indigenous student presence and success on campus. So that looks, a lot of that actually fits within the Indigenous community engagement coordinator work, doing a lot of community engagement work and outreach work, as opposed to just focusing solely on recruitment, and working collaboratively with the registrar's office for recruitment purposes and ensuring that there is representation and that opportunity for Indigenous self-ID students to connect with an Indigenous person in the university if they have staff. So that's an ongoing kind of collaboration there, and really just coming together to explore other ways to enhance each of these goals and to better support students, non-Indigenous students, Indigenous students, as well as educators and staff at the university to be aware of where and how they can contribute to reconciliation, whether that's in their individual lives, whether that's in their work, or both. So that is the purpose of the work that we do and how we support. I believe that is all. Yeah, that is all. So if anyone has any questions, recommended reading, that's the last slide, but happy to leave this up. I did allude to the truth and reconciliation reports. Those are the 4 that are listed. There are some examples of what those reports are. So honoring the truth, reconciling the future, what we have learned, the survivors speak, Canada's residential schools, the history part 1. And I believe there's also a summary, an executive summary that kind of summarizes the entire TRC reports altogether. So that's kind of a shorter read, but it's still long. But all these reports are very crucial to understand and be aware of. If you haven't read them already, I encourage folks to read them. I did allude to the inquiry to the National Inquiry for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, 2+ Spirit, Reclaiming Power and Place speaks to that. Indigenous Relations, Insights, Tips, and Suggestions to Make Reconciliation a Reality by Bob Joseph and Cynthia Joseph. I alluded to that one. 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. So that's also another kind of learning opportunity as well. And if folks are interested, Ontario Tech, in collaboration with Durham College, has launched a book club, and that will be the next book, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. So it's open to university, Ontario Tech and Durham College students, staff, and faculty, but it's also open to the general public. So you're more than welcome to register. I think a registration link will be popped into the chat, and you're welcome to register and participate as well. I don't know the date, but it should be in the registration link. And one last tip or suggestion I'll leave with is, if you're looking to support, or if you're looking to buy Indigenous resources or books or Indigenous authors' works, I encourage you to support Indigenous owned bookstores or Indigenous owned businesses to seek out these resources. One example of that is Good Minds, and they're located in Brantford, I believe, but they have a great online selection, and they also have they categorize resources as well. They have the option to categorize resources. So if you're looking for educational content for adults, you can seek that out by looking at the adult section. If you're looking for post-secondary students, there's a section for post-secondary students. I just really always encourage support Indigenous owned businesses, especially for Indigenous related content and matters. Okay, I promise that is the last one. So I will be here for questions. If anyone has any questions, I'm going to stop sharing. I just have to figure out. There we go.
Thank you, Alyssa. This has been fantastic, and we're all learning so much. While we're on the topic of resources, you did hold up a book a little bit earlier, and because the back of your screen is a little bit blurred, what was that book that you held up?
Oh, that was the Indigenous Relations one.
Okay.
I can unmute.
That's okay. Just show it again. Okay.
Yeah, so I did allude to this one a couple of times. It's a really great read. And again, there's a lot of practical do's, don'ts, recommendations, tips for reconciliation, and It's a very easy read. So that would be one great starting point if you don't know where to start. And it is the sequel, actually, to 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act.
Mm-hmm. What about resources for kids? There's a lot of us on the call that are parents, and like starting these conversations really early, I think, is pretty critical in this journey. So do you have any resources to help young kids starting? The schools are doing a really great job, and I loved the quote that you shared earlier about this all started with education and it really needs to continue with education. But like, how do you facilitate those conversations, like you said, around the dinner table, just to talk about what's going on in the world and how important this issue is?
Yeah, so of course, keeping it child friendly and age appropriate can definitely be a hard barrier to address or something to work around. So I think one piece of advice, of course, I alluded to Good Minds already. There's those categories as well, catering it to children. But I really encourage folks to also either connect with a local library or even connect with, if your child is in school, they're likely to have an Indigenous education department, and they are likely able to support in offering what kind of resources would be age appropriate, and they would be able to provide direct supports or direct resources that would be applicable to having those conversations. I know it's difficult. There's a lot of websites also. I'm trying to think. Not Anishnomic News, but there, I can't think off the top of my head. I'm so sorry. But if you look up Indigenous-based organizations, there's a lot within, I want to say North Bay area. They have a few Indigenous websites that really focus on age-friendly content. So yeah, so those would be my two examples, is to connect with your local school board, and if not, connect with a local library, because they would also be the experts in that as well.
Great. You mentioned off the top how important it is for people to like really implement the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action in all aspects of our lives. And a lot of companies have really started that process of, doing the land acknowledgement. And if a company was looking to do that, I know it's more than just, reciting off a bunch of lines at the top of your meetings, but what's a really interesting and thoughtful way that people can actually start implementing those land acknowledgements into their business practices, and a way that they can, reiterate the fact that they're committed to doing this more than just, a nice thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely my first piece of advice would be to connect with the local First Nation community that your territory resides on, and consult with them about best practices or the best way to go about it. And if you don't have access to that, you can always consult with an Indigenous professional within a community organization in your area. So I know within our team, our team capacity consists of a cultural advisor, Indigenous programming specialist, and myself, the Indigenous community engagement coordinator. The cultural advisor has supported some community organizations with that process. So really just looking to connect with a First Nation, Métis, Inuit individual for guidance on that process, and acknowledging that that needs to be done in consultation with the First Peoples of the territory. Yeah.
So through your own outreach work, have you noticed that particular aspects of Ontario Tech's brand resonate well with Indigenous students? Young, dynamic, mid-size, the tech with a conscience philosophy that we're sharing, naming of the new building with Shawinjigay Winning Hall. Like, have you had any feedback there?
Not too much yet. I think one thing, I didn't even speak to the Indigenous Education and Cultural Services visual identity, but even within that, it was the little bear logo. And within that, there's even teachings within that. And that represents courage, acknowledging it takes tremendous courage for students to potentially be leaving their communities for the first time and stepping into a space that's completely unknown, new to them, and just noting like that's part of that visual identity, is acknowledging that courage within students. And really, I think that commitment to bring on a full-time community engagement coordinator, a lot of folks do see that commitment from the university. And a lot of the other kind of things that have come up over the past couple of years as well, especially around Shawinjigay Winning Hall, they are saying it's great to see that representation. And I think that is one of the goals, right, is to create those spaces and allow Indigenous folks to see themselves represented in these mainstream institutions, because sometimes it's intimidating and we need to be breaking down those barriers. And we are doing a lot of that behind the scenes as well, to create those or to dismantle those barriers. Of course, there is a lot of work and it can't all be done within 5 years, and it's going to be a long-term commitment. So of course, there's always more that can be done, and we are working to implement more as much as we can within our limited capacity. But again, I think it comes down to resources, and we can only do as much as we can do. And what I'm really thankful for is building a community within the Durham region and working collaboratively with community partners to create this vision and create a plan and opportunities for youth and Indigenous community members to see themselves inspired and be able to pursue their goals and dreams.
That's amazing. Well, I'm very grateful to have you part of our team. And I think I speak on the rest of the university, how delighted we are to have you here today to share all of your knowledge and expertise on this subject and sharing your wisdom with us today. So thank you so much for participating in this series with us.
For sure. Thank you. Miigwech. Thank you. And
Miigwech to you too. Now, this is our 5th annual Pi Day of Giving, where we celebrate the infinite possibilities for our students here at Ontario Tech. These past 2 years have been hard on everyone, and our students are still feeling the effects of the pandemic. So I hope you will make a gift in support of our Student Relief Fund to help students who are still experiencing financial need. All donation will be matched dollar for dollar thanks to our Matching Funds program. And our Student Relief Fund has already provided more than $500,000 to students in need. That's in addition to our regular scholarship and bursary program. I'd like to thank Scotiabank for their generous sponsorship of all of our Pi Day of Giving speaker series that we've had over the last 2 weeks. Thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow, I hope you'll join us for our very last session as we wrap up this series. Dr. Mark Rosen will join us to talk about sustainability and all things climate change. You won't want to miss that one. So you can find out more information and register at ontariotechu.ca/Pi Day. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to again share a short message with you from one of our amazing students here at Ontario Tech. Thanks so much, guys, and have a great day.
There's a celebration going on at Ontario Tech. For the past 5 years, we've been coming together on March 14th on Pi Day of Giving in support of Ontario Tech students. There are infinite reasons why students choose to study here, why alumni are proud to have graduated from here, why professors continue to teach here, and why staff come to work here every day. With your help, we are reimagining our modern approach to learning through the lens of technology. We are delivering an educational experience that meets students in the world we live in today and prepares us for the world we will create tomorrow. Our state-of-the-art buildings provide students with innovative, flexible learning spaces, including collaborative labs and classrooms with leading-edge technology. In these spaces, students can turn ideas into action and make an immediate impact on our world. When you make a gift on Pi Day, you're helping to create future leaders who will contribute and thrive in today's world. You're making an impact that resonates and touches all of us. When you give, we all receive. So this Pi Day, let's celebrate and count all the ways that we can work together to create a brighter future and deliver infinite possibilities for students like me.